What's up, guys? Jared here. In 1882, Friedrich Nietzsche's character of the Madman famously said, "God is dead, and we have killed him," prophesizing a nihilistic sentiment that had the potential to either destroy a culture or liberate humanity to create their own value system outside the constraints of religion. In 2017, Rick Sanchez told his daughter, "You're smart. When you know nothing matters, the universe is yours." This line from Rick, along with countless others, tickled the brains of millions of fans, leading them to scour Reddit or watch a 20-minute video essay, and in less than an hour, they've successfully contextualized their growing sense of disillusionment with religious narratives in the logic of Nietzsche's Madman's famous proclamation. So, armed with only the spirit of the times and the words of a cartoon character, these fans have, in some sense, come to understand a key message from one of the most brilliant minds in history. But if an insight so revolutionary that it can only be formulated by one of the 19th century's most advanced thinkers in his late 30s can be understood by your average 17-year-old cartoon enthusiast in 2017 after an hour on the internet, does that mean that teenagers today are smarter, or at least as smart, as Nietzsche? Now, Rick and Morty is often lampooned for breeding fans who use the show to inflate their perceived sense of intelligence, identifying with Rick's existential angst that results from his cold, rational, and entirely mechanical worldview. Now, sure, sometimes these fans act like fools, and making fun of them is entirely warranted. But at the risk of turning into another well-to-be-fair meme, I'd like to be a little bit more charitable toward the fans, and argue that there's actually something quite profound going on here. So in order to determine if a Rick and Morty fan is smarter than Nietzsche, we're gonna have to talk about developmental theory, aka the development of adult brains, which according to thinkers Emil Fries and Daniel Yurtz in their books The Listening Society and Nordic Ideology, is no less than the key to the future. And this key that they develop through their pseudonym Hansi Freinecht is called metamodernism. You know, the thing that comes after modernism and postmodernism. But before we go any further, I want to tell you guys about my efforts on Twitch. I am streaming Elden Ring Tuesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Elden Ring is so good. My username is Kalsarikanit87. Kalsarikanit is a word in Finnish that means chilling real hard, getting drunk in your underwear with no aspirations of leaving the house. Because I live in Finland right now, I am trying to kind of broaden that word to the rest of the world. So not only on my Twitch stream am I playing that, but I've got guests like Ryan Haley and Mark Schroeder, who played Garrick's Wormuloid recently. We can talk further about these and other ideas, so come check me out on Twitch. All right, now back to it. So why is it that a 15-year-old can understand Newtonian physics, but the greatest philosopher of the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas, who wrote hundreds of years before Newton, couldn't? Does that mean that the modern teenager is smarter than Aquinas? Probably not, just as you probably guessed, your average Szechuan sauce enthusiast isn't as smart as Nietzsche. But to understand the nuance of what is going on here, we're going to have to understand Hansi's model of how the brain develops to higher levels of complexity. According to Hansi's developmental theory of the brain, one's overall cognitive capacity is an accumulation of four metrics. One, one's cognitive development, which is essentially their smarts. Two, their symbolic development. Three, their lived in or experienced states, and four, their existential depth. Now together, these four variables cumulatively make up one's effective value meme. But to ensure that this video doesn't get absurdly long, we're going to be focusing on cognitive development and mostly symbolic development. So one's cognitive level is quite simply the level of complexity of their thinking. This includes both the general efficiency of your brain's computing power, aka horizontal complexity, as well as vertical complexity, which is a bit more complicated. The vertical complexity of one's thought refers to the ability to deduce abstract variables from a narrative and then find relationships between those abstract variables, and then recognize systems within these relationships, and then finding the commonalities within the systems, etc., etc. So a computer could have a very high horizontal complexity since it can do insane amounts of calculations in a second, but an almost non-existent vertical complexity as they don't produce new ideas and new meanings. So the great minds that we've mentioned, Nietzsche, Newton, Aquinas, Rick Sanchez, were stacked when it comes to cognitive development on both the horizontal and vertical axes. But if that's the case, why couldn't Aquinas figure out Newton's physics? Was Newton just that much more cognitively developed than Aquinas' dumbass? Not quite, because parallel to an individual's cognitive development, there also occurs the development of language structures on a society-wide level. This is symbolic development, which is, in Hanzi's words, the evolution of the world of language and shared symbolic universe. In a sense, it's the words and ideas that each of us have internalized and been socialized to understand. This is what is meant by symbolic development. It's essentially the evolutionary development of memes. Now, not memes in the damn Daniel sense. Well, actually, never mind. I take that back. It's actually the same thing, because whether it's Harambe or Newton's physics, new cultural patterns are bred through communication. So the first person to organize a Harlem Shake meme updated our cultural code so that all someone had to say is Harlem Shake to indicate a bizarre viral dance ritual that's still really hard to explain to someone. If you had said Harlem Shake to Albert Einstein, it wouldn't matter that his cognitive level is among the highest in human history. He wouldn't have the symbolic code to understand it. Similarly, Newton was able to update the cultural code so that people after him could also understand his many breakthroughs. And it's this symbolic toolkit that Aquinas didn't have access to that any random high schooler in 2022 does. A really useful analogy that Hanzi uses is that of a computer. So one's cognitive development is like hardware, whereas symbolic development is like software. A person today can essentially download and install the previous code systems that have developed through the evolution of language. Now, having said that, complex software doesn't run well on outdated hardware, so you can't run Elden Ring on an N64, and just because someone installs the cultural codes that originated with postmodern thinkers like Foucault or Derrida doesn't mean that they're not at risk of using a flattened, kind of low-res version of those ideas. So, is your average Rick and Morty fan smarter than Nietzsche? Of course not. Nietzsche's level of cognitive development was awe-inspiring, and as such, he represented a huge step forward in the development of this toolkit of interrelated symbols that we use to interpret the world. But this evolution of language to the point of a teenager understanding the death of God, it doesn't happen immediately. Over a long period of time following Nietzsche's breakthrough, communication continues to dialectically breed novel patterns of language until one day, all it takes is an episode of a cartoon and a half-hour YouTube video for your average high schooler to download a version of Nietzsche's cultural code and comprehend the ramifications of the death of God, a concept that a couple hundred years ago was only accessible to a handful of cognitive elites. Now, in the book, Hanzi actually goes to break down each of these symbolic codes into a hierarchy of symbolic development, from Faustian to post-Faustian to modern to postmodern to ultimately metamodern. Now, although I'm going to save any kind of detailed explanation of these for another video, or you can come on my Twitch stream and ask me about it and we can talk about it there, what this particular discussion regarding Rick and Morty marks is a development from a traditional cultural code to a modern cultural code. After those come postmodern and metamodern, respectively. And look, I don't think it was Dan and Justin's aspiration to build on our symbolic toolkit through the show. That's not exactly how this works. I think that realistically, their dark sense of humor mixed with their passion for sci-fi cosmic horror incidentally became an extremely accessible crystallization of the modern symbol stage, the stage that emphasizes truth as that which can be confirmed by multiple subjectivities. So something isn't true because someone else says so, but I have to be able to observe it to say it's true. That person has to be able to observe it. Everyone has to be able to agree that something is true. And also a sense of skepticism toward the pre-given meaning of life inscribed to us by religion, as well as the challenging, perhaps even depressing ramifications of a cold and rational worldview. Now, I've had a pretty complicated relationship with Rick and Morty in my time on this platform. There were times where I hated the show because it had become a bizarre part of my identity. People would stop me on the street and call me the Rick and Morty video guy, and sometimes my sense of well-being became a little bit too tied to how insightful the latest episode is. But reading the works of Daniel and Emil have really helped me come to a new appreciation for what we accomplished in those videos. Now, sure, it's easy to make fun of people for thinking they're as smart as Rick and we could just keep calling them fools and go home. But I think that doing so would miss out on a pretty profound beauty that the show and its unique reception by viewers perhaps spontaneously represents. A sign that language and culture is advancing. That advanced modes of thought are able to be installed by more and more people. That they're, in a sense, becoming cross-platform. It's not that Rick and Morty is making people smarter. It's that language and symbols are developing, and Rick and Morty is a medium through which this symbolic development flows. And regardless of how funny or entertaining the show has become, I'm really grateful that it exists as such a unique cultural artifact. Now, I suggested earlier that this idea of mental development is no less than the key to the future, and I don't want to leave you guys hanging on that. Well, it would take a multiple-hour video to distill Daniel and Emil's 1,000+ pages, but the idea is essentially this. In order to tackle the complex problems of our time, we need deeper democracy. And in order for democracy to achieve greater depth, we need to prioritize and foster adult mental development, in the same vein that we develop economic and technological systems. In order to face the challenges of the future, we need to emphasize cultural, psychological, and behavioral development. The more abstract layers of reality that we can discern, the more complex systems we can collectively create. Now, in some ways, I feel like this video may breed more questions than it provides answers, so if you want to talk more about the exciting world of metamodernism as described by Daniel and Emil, be sure to hit me up on Twitch and let's talk about it. I just finished both of their books, and my buddy out here in Finland actually knows them, so I'm going to try to get them on the stream sometime soon. So even if you're not a Twitch person, because neither was I, make an account and follow me. I'm actually having a really good time doing it. There's less algorithm nonsense that can drive somebody crazy with YouTube. There's also a lot of freedom and a lot of opportunity to be authentic. So, you know, if you've followed my first video on this channel, you know that's what I'm all about here. Plus, Elden Ring is stupidly good. So anyway, that's all for me today, and as always, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe for more content, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.